Hey, and I wonder, those 5 assists, is that one that you threw to Sad? Does that count?
I do think Caitlyn being is a pawn. Caitlyn didn't bring racism. That of you make this has been happening, and that I think is what's been such a shock for all of us. Then other people are surprised by that. Super just brutally destroyed WNBA racist, and honestly it was way overdue. Like seriously, we've got MVPs legends and gold medalists tiptoeing around these issues, but finally someone's got the guts to call it out, and Sue didn't just speak up for the sake of it. Instead she went in with flamethrowers. So before we continue, there is one thing I want to reset, that we want to reset, and it's the language being used around fans, leaver fans, Caitlyn fans, new fans, that actually has to go, taking names, burning bridges, and doing it all with style. And do you know the best part? She knew it could blow up her career, but she didn't flinch. In a no-holds-barred podcast with Megan Repeat, No Subaru ripped into the entire system, asking why Caitlin Clark is the target of so much racial hate by her insane performances and skyrocketing sales are getting overlooked, and even hinting at a league agenda against her. So stick till the end before this video gets deleted. Didn't. Did you, or when you win any kind of swat at a Caitlyn, did you intend to hit her in the IM, and if so, could you just, or of Earth, not either way, could you talk about what happened on that? But I don't even know why it, and said anybody, and that doesn't even make sense to me if I know I did, and I didn't know I had actually. So it all started when Christine, a journalist, asked Dethroned Carrington about this eye-poking situation after a game. You think it was just a regular question, right? Athletes get grilled on intense moments like this all the time, but not this time. Somehow this whole thing took a sharp turn, calling Christine's question loaded with racism. Repeat No jumped in, saying the question might seem harmless, but the way it's being asked, yeah, it's got some racial undertones. Just like that, a whole new layer to the conversation opened up. Obviously, hearing it initially, my visceral reaction was like, that's not good. That doesn't feel good. That feels racist, to be honest. And Sue, she wasn't about to let this one slip by without calling out the media, especially PPN, for turning this into a circus. In her classic Subaru style, she said the question wasn't necessarily racist, but the way it's being twisted and spun by the media. Oh, that's definitely problematic. Sue pointed out how athletes of color get thrown under the microscope way more than their white counterparts. But if a black player is involved, suddenly it's a bigger deal, a controversy, or worst of all, a racial issue. I do disagree with you. I don't think it was a school digger's question. I think it was a fine question based on what was going on at the moment, but so was just getting warmed up. She connected the dots and said this is part of a much bigger picture. Now Christine probably didn't mean for all this to blow up the way it did, but somehow WNBA decided that it is. She called out the whole system, media, fans, the league, everyone who lets these stories grow legs and run wild. According to Sue, this whole thing with Dethroned, I wouldn't have gotten nearly as much attention if it had been a white player, if a white athlete had been in Carrington's shoes. But since it was decent, now we've got a full-blown story on our hands, complete with all the racial undertones you can think of. One stay in his comments went viral. It led to the Twitter trolls and bots taking over, and what started there was this narrative of petty jealous players hating on Caitlyn. That's really what happened. That's where it started, that we must just dislike her, that we look at her side-eyed, that we don't want her to come in the WNBA be successful, that we're hating on her, right? So we're petty and we're jealous. Then she moved to how this narrative started from the comment of one player, Diana Taurasi, yeah, the legend herself. I decided to casually drop a comment that was so loaded it basically set the WNBA world on fire, like we're talking full-blown chaos, and of course Sue Bird, our resident voice of reason, had to step in and break it all down, because it's about the whole freaking ripple effect those words create, and this time it hit harder than anyone was ready for. And when says things got ugly, she means ugly. It wasn't just the usual rivalry trash talk anymore. Racial accusations were flying, hate speech was creeping in, and suddenly the games weren't about basketball at all. Oh no, now we're talking about race, privilege, and every other thing you'd expect to show up when fans get riled up over something bigger than the game itself. It was like they forgot why they even showed up in the first place. Not at any point that I think Caitlyn was targeted, and I'm going to stop on that word, because what happened was these petty jealousy narratives that got formed then when the season started and people saw people blocking Caitlyn's shot or picking up full court, it then became, oh, they are targeting her, oh, they are trying to hurt her. See, Uber didn't hold back when she talked about how Caitlyn had to deal with way more than just the usual elbows and trash talk. Oh no, Caitlyn was dodging physical blows, and not the metaphorical kind. Every time she stepped onto the court, it was like she had to brace herself for more than just the opposing team's strategy. Players were taking shots at her, literal shots, and it wasn't about fair play. Sue made it crystal clear this wasn't just tough defense. What Caitlyn was dealing with went way beyond the typical rough and tumble of a WNBA game. It was personal, and it was ugly. Of course, Sue didn't gloss over the racial side of things either. She said it straight. What was happening to Caitlyn wasn't just about her being good at basketball, it was about race privilege and how some players of color saw her rise as a reflection of something way bigger. Why was Caitlyn getting all the attention? Why was she being lifted up when other players weren't? Sue didn't hold back. This wasn't just a spar. Its issue anymore. It was about the broader context of race in the league, and those frustrations, they were now playing out in real time on the court, with Caitlyn caught in the crossfire. So I think is really just the fans, her fans, the Iowa fans, now the Indiana fans that are like her or Ann, and I respect that respectfully, but sometimes it's very disrespectful. I think there's a lot of racism when it comes to, and I don't bully she stands or any of that. She also did not hold back while talking about Angel Reese and Alyssa Thomas like she's been sitting on this tea for way too long. You know, these to Race, who's been loud and proud since her LSU days, and Thomas, who's been Iraq for the Connecticut Sunday and not exactly shy, and they've been out here calling out Caitlin Clark and her fans for racism. And by that they mean she's getting the white girl pass to them. Caitlyn is getting special treatment, and not because of her skills, but because of the color of her skin. They've made her the poster child for white privilege and the WNBA. Honestly, it's been a lot of nonsense. Racial comments from uber nice, but Sue, she wasn't having any of that. She went full on truth mode, proving that this is the wrong narrative and it has to go. She said in a direct and bold way, that's not what's happening here, and what recent Thomas are doing isn't just wrong, it's harmful. All of what I've said led to this group of people being able to push those races, genders, which really has been, in my opinion, the cause of all this, and everybody from this moment on has, not everybody, but a lot of people have been operating under the assumption that these narrative, it's particularly the targeting narrative, is trip. Sue's not saying racism doesn't exist in the WNBA. She's not blind, but she's calling out the fact that these accusations against Caitlyn, yeah, they don't hold water. She thinks recent Thomas are using this racial narrative as a cover-up for their own frustrations, and instead of taking responsibility, Eddie, for their own performance, they're dragging Caitlyn into the mud. Sue didn't sugarcoat it either. She laid it all out. According to her, this isn't some groundbreaking expose on racism in sports, it's more like an excuse, and spoiler alert, Sue's not here for it. School just like Cosby dismayed. Racism has been impacting the WNBA well before this year. This is not a new governor, this is, and in that way I do think 8-1's being used as a pawn. Caitlyn didn't bring racism. That of he make this has been happening, and that I think it's what's been such a shock for all of us than other people have surprised by the Caitlyn Clark's rise has been wild, no doubt about that. She's killing it on the court, but now she's also caught in the middle of this racial storm that honestly she didn't ask for. Bird was like, look, Caitlyn getting a lot of attention, but let's not act like that's just because she's white, but because she's an amazing player. Bird thinks people have twisted this whole thing into a full-blown narrative that's got nothing to do with reality. Sure, Oakland's got the spotlight on her, but Sue wasn't about to let Reason Thomas turn this into something it's not. Yeah, she's obviously doing amazing. For game speaks for itself. I think my favorite part is just women's basketball, women's sports really, but women's baseball has been on the rise, and it's kind of like what Magic and Bird was to men's basketball. Like this moment we kind of needed something that like, yeah, and Caitlyn that moment, and I think a lot of has to do with her logo threes. One of the biggest shockers, though, Sue dropped the bomb that she's actually spoke. Then Clark herself, she's gotten to know her, and guess what? The whole white privilege narrative that recent Thomas are pushing, yeah, that's not the whole story. So made it clear that Caitlyn is not some privileged player just coasting on her skin color. She's been grinding, working her way up just like everyone else. Bird knows the situation is way more complicated than people are making it out to be, and she's not afraid to say it. I understand why at times it's been years. It's kind of just when you're in an interview and you get asked a question, it's kind of easy to go, oh, the Fever families. He only lately my that has all these new fans. It as it out, because it's not the Fever fans, it's not Caitlyn fans. That is a lot. Large group of people. Let's stick with the Fever for a second. That is a large group of people, and what we're talking about as we get into the meat of this, we're talking about the faction of that group that is pushing racist agendas, and it's pushing hate and creating divisiveness online. But here's where things get really messy. Sue said this whole narrative about race has turned into a free pass for players to physically target Caitlyn on the court. It's like people are using this racism accusation as an excuse to go after her, and it's not just about basketball anymore. Caitlyn not just dodging verbal show. Shade, she's literally out here dodging elbows, getting roughed up, and it's all getting way too personal. Berg made it super clear this isn't just a competitive game anymore. Players are taking their frustrations, whether it's about race or jealousy or whatever, and using it to come after Caitlyn in ways that cross the line. When Kennedy Carter cheap shots Caitlin Clark, and a play that I can draw conclusions from. Because as Caitlin Clark said, it simply was not a basketball boy, and you know Sue doesn't hold back. She said flat out that the whole racial bias talk has been weaponized, and it's not helping anybody. Instead of actually dealing with real issues of race in the league, players like recent Thomas are making it worse by turning the court into some kind of battleground.